this session, I think it lines up really well with the finishing notes of Joe. I mean, when we talk about hybrid economic futures for First Nations people and looking at the economic empowerment and success across Northern Australia, you know, this is something that's real. This is something that we've had to push through for a very long time, and you heard the history from Joe, what he spoke about. This is not a fight that's just happened recently. This has been an ongoing fight. You know, we have to think about what is important to First Nations people. And with both Barry and Dean here, we're going to try and cover as much as we can and share our stories, the challenges, but also the success stories and the resilience within our stories. So, Barry, I might just start with you, if that's okay, if you can just introduce yourself.
I too want to just pay my respects and acknowledge the lands of Larrakia and the Larrakia people. I'm now residing on the lands of Larrakia in this amazing country. But my people, on my father's side of the Jabbergai, and my mother's side, the Jitterbul, which is the sort of Cairns, hinterland, Atherton Tablelands area. I grew up in a little place called Cranda, up in the hills in the rainforest. My interest has been around Aboriginal land and sea management for a long while. I've worked in conservation, land management, mining, and other NGO sector. But also in carbon as well. And before I get into it, I just want to shout out a couple of words. So when I'm in country and I call out the country, my spirits stand tall. And I've been around this space for quite a while and had the privilege of experiencing a whole range of different parts of, and as Joe was talking about, around land and sea management and the evolving nature of it. But I might just hand over to Dean and let him introduce himself.
Yep. Thanks, Barry. Dean Barber, Melingrita. Being here many times and telling our stories about what is happening within our regions, plus supporting and helping other communities as well to make them being with us as well, rather than, you know, leaving someone behind and struggling. Something that I had being fortunate enough to take on back in 1990s, the earliest possible, as Joe mentioned it. I started off with bringing in many of our communities within our regions because of a thing that what we faced, especially when I came across a mimosa pigra, Sylvania, feral animals, like buffaloes and pigs within the regions. And that's gave me a really, really shock because of thinking of the damage that would do in our own environment. So I worked really hard and joined many of the institutions in Darwin through our scientists, Jeremy and his crew. I work with the CDU. I work helped out in setting up a community engagement program, looking at employment, education, and many other things within our communities. For 30 years, 10 years or 12 years in Meningrita, setting up a land management space, land and sea programs was the first area where I targeted, and it was a successful program where many people, young and old people, came in together and started talking about the landscape and the culture and the fire and the homelands that they left. When we brought into the one area in place in Meningrita, there was an impact, which is not a bad impact, but it's a good impact. Government started to, pour in some, bringing in employment, education, and other municipal work within that community. But later in the years, 15 years or 20 years later, land management came on board through the land care program. That was I was interested in trying, get in and trying to find a ways of getting, adequate fundings or small funding to start up. It's a LIFT funding, a CDP program. So we started off with the CDP program, and a lot of the clan group around the regions of Meningrita had turned up, talking about the land management, talking about the histories, why they came down to live, and now they're seeing depression, seeing the differences. The impact started to grow from 50s, 60s, and 70s. Like in 50s, I remember I was told there are 40 people who are living in Meningrida. The whole family of my grandfathers, my uncles and my nephews, the elders were living out there, harmony. But for their stories, were telling us about the success trade been happening before I was born. I was born in 1955. They're able to keep their stories about how they seen the trade work. I mean, they had a bit of issues between the trade group like Siliwasis and our territorial. People of the north from Nuka or from Numbulwa, Green Island, across to Irkala, Elko, Milingimbi, Meningrida, Coburg. There is a marks of a tree pang they harvested in that region. And the story that I was told, it was a successful because the materials and tools they've shown our people, because our people that didn't have any tools, didn't have blankets, didn't have clothes, and all that. So as they worked at the tree bank, they didn't even know the money or dollars in their hands, no, except working and helping and supporting indigenous people across the continent about the burning, not burning, about the cooking a tree bank and selling off. But people got their pay back by, tools, knife, axe, blanket, sheets, clothing, and materials, all that. People were impressed. During that time, and things went on and on and on until the Second World War started. Late 70s or 60s, 66 or 60, 65, slowly the Malaysian trades or the trading businesses started to drift away back to the home, Siliwaisi or places where they came from. The last gathering and people that came over, like Siliwaisi and all the traders, they came saying goodbye to the people landing on our coastal areas and saying, we're finishing off and going back, thank you. So, people are very, very happy and sad in a way because they are families as well. We still believe there's a lot of families in the Siliwaisi. We still believe there's people down within those regions because of friendships, whatever there was. We knew that people from Croker, Goldman, and Galawinku, that there's a family out there that told us the stories. But that was a good old days, good old time when people were really, really were happy. And at the time, burning was still happening without even understanding there was other people outside within our country were dominating, saying there shouldn't be any fires in Australia. When the British colonized our country, it was so different. It was very, very different. A lot of people got scared. Within our region, people got scared because of things they heard from other side of our country, like down a bit further in western or in south. The story flows. We didn't have any telephone or whatever, but just the story flows by air. How amazing that! Because people, the elders, had dreamt a very important spiritual beliefs. And that happened, people started to worry a lot. More and more, our country got colonized, especially in Darwin. And we knew a lot of people living in Darwin, also our families from further east, was coming because of the war. They all settled in Darwin. But most of the people in Arnhem ran away in the bush. But they had their own clan estate. During the colonization or before the colonization, our people who lived on a clan estate and managed the country, not by a Western kind of machines or tools that they used. No, there was only one simple tools they used, fire. Fire was our greatest strength. The fire that gave us ritual practices, beliefs, the ancient stories told by our families, our elders. We didn't invest that, fire through money, no. That practices and fire that invested through our cultural ceremony line. Two clan groups would pass the ceremony, right? And that's for practice for one, because the invitation was given to one clan group to another clan group. That's how the practice has been happening. Is through the gift of the trade of the culture and in the ceremony line. The ceremony has been given to other clan group that continue on. They're making the family ritual practices between those two clans. Not only two clans, but there are lots of other clan groups. They came together just to help and support. Today, just in the 19th centuries to 2000, this climate warming started to appear. Climate change to appear. There's been a lot of stories and been, given to us, told about what is happening. It's sort of caught in my mind. How can I go through and get and set something that we can work and something to stop this climate change? The only way that I've gone through is through land care programs. I joined in and started to invest or look for the ways of setting up a land management in Maningrida for time being, just to see how it happened. During that time, that when we had that conference, that's where all the stories was collected by individual clan leaders and young rangers, young people that came in, start talking about and caring for country. Yes, this is our country. We want to protect it. We want to see there's native animals and native flora and fauna to save them. But we didn't know something was ahead of us and was coming toward the western side from the east to west. And that was really hard for us. Today, we're still trying to do a lot of surveys and see where our little floras or fauna, especially small mammals and animals. What I'm talking about is the cane toads that came through from the Queensland, through the sugarcane areas. Everyone's really, really was scared. And knowing that, this thing will just come and live and destroy our land. Waterways, our small mammals, bandicoots and rats that culturally lived where our elders and our elders saw it was still there. And those animals are still there, even though the people saying, it's gone, they're gone for good. No, but we have to do practices, songs, dance, practice to bring them back. That's what we've been doing through this our fire management. That's the real jobs through this fire. We're not burning there for the sake of what we want, like money. No, we're doing this management for our animals, for our cultural reasons, explorations, in doing our practices. We're doing it for young children today growing up, to train them to become our next leaders, to become really powerful and take on the ritual practices and all that, to be able to understand each individual animals, their behavior, their songs and all that. Plants, our yams and other, whether they're in the billabongs or whether they're in the landscape or in the jungles. They all have songs. When something appear naturally in some way in our animal, people understand that and able trying to make things happen, to bring those things back on the landscape so we can manage them. Our homes, when we left back in 40s or 50s, our families, still there. Our guardians still waiting for us to go back. And in the area that now I set up as the Indigenous Protected Area is a not-for-profit company for protecting and working to observe our country, helping other people to live and manage, bringing that education process in the bush. In the bush where we can train our cultural education, both between the cultural education and Western education, so they can live and able to challenge in both sides, Western culture and traditional culture as well. Able to tell their stories for a long, long period. I'm 70 years old now. I think it's about time for my young ones today over these last 10 years, I've been traveling internationally, especially in South America. Today, there's a 10 or 5 young people or young rangers, it's their turn to travel because that they came from my experience, my knowledge, my teaching. Now it's young kids are picking it up, and they become a really, really champion in this land management space culture. And when you take people out of the land, from the community and base them in a homeland where they belong and where their fathers and uncles belong, that's a practice, that's the education, that's a school. Our people, we left the country because of ignorances and greeds, moving toward the places where it's set up. We thought it was going to be, we could live and survive happily, but things have changed. That's why we want to change the way and maintain the two cultures, Western culture and traditional practices. And this is how we want to see our children to grow up. Today we're seeing in a community such as Maningrida, there was only 500 people back in those 20 years ago, or 30 years ago, or 40 years ago. Now, 4,000. That's because of people got stuck. And our land right, it won't give us extra rights to go back and build a new outstation, because those outstations, those rules have stopped for new outstation.
Sorry, Dean, I'm just going to stop you there, because I think you touch on a very good point in regards to working in both worlds. We're working from a cultural perspective, but also from a Western perspective. We probably would have heard throughout the day just the importance of bringing those two different ideas together, and sometimes it's impossible, because it is very conflicting when we talk about land, when we talk about Aboriginal people, when we talk about economies, when we talk about protection and conservation. And I think this is where it's really important, like the bodies of NALSMA. You've heard from Joe previously, they talked about what was happening right across Northern Australia for First Nations people, and the voices of First Nations people coming together to be able to address some of these concerns that have been around for a very long time and kept on falling on deaf ears. And I think just the role of NALSMA, Barry, if you can just sort of give a brief, around your role with NALSMA and what role you play in this space around building economies, but also looking at, this new innovative way of utilising the Western system to really benefit First Nations people in this space.
Thanks, Sissy. And thanks, Dean, as well, for some of the storytelling. So, I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the North Australian Indigenous Land and Sea Management Alliance, and one of the things that Joe had always championed and working with the communities was cultural-based economies. And I think that's an important legacy, but it's also an important narrative. And what does that mean when we unpack it? And Dean was talking about in the early work that was undertaken with the likes of Jeremy Russell-Smith and CDU, around taking that millennial-old practice of burning country and understanding country, and then utilising it to be able to, as one of the 32 methods to reduce our carbon output and meet our obligations towards Paris, the Paris Agreement. So that, in the concept of it, seems bizarre at the time, and we know now that method is entering into its fifth transition, and also that we know that there are many Indigenous people across Northern Australia, mostly rangers, employed in and around the carbon space. So that idea of Savannah Fire to reduce the carbon output by implementing small cool burns during certain times of the year reduces the risk of wildfires later in the year, and therefore carbon output. So those types of nature-based practices and concepts are still there, and that's what we're exploring. So the work that NALSMA is doing, we do a lot of R&D around method development, particularly looking at the nature repair market, but broader than the nature repair, so that there's a broader environmental market space, and we're exploring and looking at different methods under that. Working with Dean's mob out that way, and also with ASREC, and there's a whole range of different groups. So we were funded under the nature repair investigation pilot programs to look at nature repair biodiversity method for Savannah Fire. And we also partner with Kimberley Land Council, Aboriginal Carbon Foundation and Indigenous Desert Alliance to look at methods like the desert upland methods around the same approach. So these are methods possibly under nature repair, but they can also become methods under any broader environmental market. But building the rigour and the requirements and the integrity to show that there's where there's a threatening act or a threatening activity, that if you reduce that activity, that there's potential to earn income from it, and working with countrymen around that basis. So that's, as you can imagine, a heavily science-based approach. So our job also within that is with countrymen that we're working with, that's where cultural authority sits. So we have really given some real strong thought about how we take that cultural authority and through that process maintain the cultural integrity within it. And so that the data that's coming out isn't just straight data. There's indicators in there, there's cultural indicators, key cultural species within those approaches that we can talk to, and whether those species are there or not in the landscape can define whether the health of the country. So there's a whole range of different things in that CICI that we're looking at. And again, the key approach is to find a way of an innovative way of having people on country employed at local level to be able to drive income from nature-based solutions for so they can just maintain their lifestyle. Key to that is addressing a few of our key strategic goals, and that's people on country, their rights and interests looked after, and they got the opportunity to earn a living in doing so. Young people as well. So there's a number of things that we're addressing within our key plan. We partner with research institutions. 80% of our funding is philanthropic. That has allowed us to get on and do this work. But we also got government contracts around weeds and ferals and a little bit of biosecurity work.
Thank you, Barry. I mean, it's always such an interesting conversation because First Nations, we play a really important role in this space when we're talking about conservation and land management. And we're talking about protection of species, protection of the land and the waters. And, it's always very interesting space because I've been in this space for nearly 20 years with native title and conservation and land management. And being around this space, it's always very contradictory to what we're all trying to achieve. We're trying to protect the country, but also looking at those opportunities for First Nations people in a way that we can use our country in a way to look at economic development, but also making informed decision. And you say, free, prior and informed consent is really important, and looking at making informed decisions. And a lot of the times, our structures within our groups aren't properly resourced. And I think this is the work that both Dean and Barry and others have been involved with, trying to look at how do we get resources that is going to actually build the competence and also the capability within our own people. And it's always been a challenge because for an Aboriginal person, when you sit on a board, you have to know the laws. You have to read the Western laws to be able to look at how do you manoeuvre and navigate through this space. And it's always very conflicting to our views and what we believe in, but also looking at how do we bring these views from a cultural perspective and from a First Nations perspective on the benefits of coming back to people and our people. Dean, I know you're the co-chair of ISIN, so both you and I sit on there as co-chairs, and just with that work, you've been one of the founders also in that space and bringing, all our groups together. Are you able to just talk about the role of ISIN and what sort of priorities that's come up for our members?
I think we all sit together, CC and all our board, and discuss what is next. ISIN is one of the entity that I was involved setting up. Before that, KKT. Like my role is, I went out and trying to look for and setting up this entity just for support. But with ISIN, I value ISIN because it is very, very, we want to see something that's going to invest a lot of things, going to invest our people, and talk very, very fluent and hard for our people, for engagement, or for for works, and especially through our carbon, through our fireworks and all that, because there's a lot of negative people outside that we want to try to teach and tell them this is not what we are doing. We're trying to build something in the future for our people to be able to generate incomes for the benefit of their livelihoods. But you know, there's a lot of area that need to be covered. This fire projects has been happening as from the Queensland, Northern Territory, all the way to Kimberley in Western Australia. How successful is that? People that, we're all working at the same levels and managing the same thing. This is where ISIN is sitting on top of it, looking out for these, what projects are we doing through this climate change. And ISIN is one of the things that when we do this, when we're doing a fire max, we will make sure what carbon it's produced, we get adequate funding, not just for our company, but for our people, spreading those dollars to many ranger groups for for work and for their machines or for the tools that they need. With the kids, young people today in the land management area, especially rangers, are being trained with GPS, with these other modern technologies when they go up in the air on a chopper and do work on the ground. At the same time, the rangers do need other technologies to carry on. They need vehicles. At the moment, vehicles is a problem. That's why we're working. The ranger groups are working hard to get their money back for what they do in their projects. The money goes to buying equipment, and that will sustain them in the long run with adequate vehicles or machines or technologies they work on.
Dean, just on that point, because when we look at Indigenous ranges right across Northern Australia, and we know that the federal government put some more funding out there to expand on the numbers of rangers. And Barry, I'd like to just hear probably from you also, just in regards to the modelling around the ranges around Australia, and if it's working, if it's not working, and maybe some idea of how could we make this work to make sure that the work that the rangers are doing is taken seriously, because we know at the moment it's funded through NIA, and we know for a fact that all the information that's gathered, the data is not actually put towards the Department of Environment. So it's taken as a job CDP work program. So Indigenous rangers aren't even taken seriously at that national level. But yet a lot of our kids are aspiring to be rangers on country, because that is an opportunity to return back to country. That is an opportunity to be able to have a job, because there isn't a lot of job opportunities on our communities. So I'd like to hear some of your perspectives on that, Barry.
Yeah, thanks, Sissy. So I like what you said there. And for young people, and that certainly was the case for me, is that you can't be what you can't see. And the picture of rangers is really visible, and we see that right across Northern Australia. And when the opportunities for more ranger funding comes along, everyone celebrates. And the announcement from the current Labor government to double the ranger numbers was a celebration. Everyone went, yep, great. But it's problematic. What you're in fact doing is doubling the bottom half of the workforce, because within each of the responsible workforces, and it's not all the cases, some exceptional examples here, and Dom and Mimmel, that's certainly a good example of it, of where there's really sound succession management and planning through the workforce. But the reality is that top half of the workforce, where coordinator and manager sit, is still predominantly non-Indigenous. So how do we get that succession planning so that young person coming through has the opportunity to grow? And we know that there's cultural and family and a whole range of different management and other social circumstances that put pressure on a young Indigenous person within their own community. But that could not be the only reason. So how do we build that within that succession within the workforce? And we call it sector development, and that idea around capability and succession planning and the training and the mentoring, but also some of the more sort of specialist work that needs to occur within that space, that's what needs to be considered. So that it's not just a CDP, and you mob out there might be wondering what CDP, that's the Commonwealth Development Employment Program. And that's what, unfortunately, the Rangers is at this moment. It's a CDP program. And Minister Malanderi, in all due respect to her, can talk about real jobs. We've got some real jobs there, but the growth within Ranger wages is stagnant. It has not grown. The growth within the sector and the scope between the different levels, you walk into national parks in Queensland, WA, NT, you've got different levels. You look at Indigenous ranges, you don't have that. So how do we build those level of capabilities and understanding and structures within? Like I say, there are some examples of this. I showed that can be done. Another key point with that is that within those levels of capabilities is obviously the cultural capability. So how do you build a sound, round organisation that's producing these key individuals and stop the pressure that comes in from out externally on Indigenous rangers, because there's a whole lot of pressures out there, and someone from tourism might come in, our rangers should be doing this. Someone from natural disaster comes in and goes, oh, someone should be doing this. And I look at that and I say, you know what we're building? We're building Swiss Army Rangers. Seriously. Because everyone want a piece of these rangers and have this level of expectations. But what they're paid to do is natural and cultural resource management. So get back to the basics and help and build that capability within that system.
Thank you, Barry. And I think just on that note, due to funding restraints, with our PBCs and our different ranger groups, we're having to apply for funding. There's not a lot of there's no recurrent funding for our Indigenous rangers. And when we talk about economies and building economies and looking for the future in economics, and a lot of our rangers are trying to do some of this, but it's very reactive to what's put upon us. And that's what I find in this space right now, is that we're constantly reacting to what the conservation groups are putting towards us. We're constantly, reacting to what the, Department of Environment is putting towards us, or what the government of the day is putting towards us. And Joe spoke about this really clearly around the white paper development, that, there's not a lot of opportunity for Indigenous people to look at those economies and development of real infrastructure and economies right across Northern Australia for our people. So I think when we're talking about this, when we talk about capability and capacity, Dean, you touched on this previously, the importance of people on country, the people returning to country, and, the Butch Uni, the importance of that, and around building that capability and capacity locally. So maybe if you can just give us a brief around, the structure around building universities on country to be able to make sure that our people are being, supported on country, and looking at this model that actually complements from a cultural perspective, from a family perspective, from a livelihood perspective, but also bringing in that knowledge where we can actually grow from that local grassroots level.
It took us a while to try and come up with an idea of our own university. I know the university in Darwin, but many times when we send our people out there, it discomforts them because of the challenge. Many of our students, sometimes when they come, colleges or uni, maybe 1 year or more, sometimes our families or students, they find it a bit hard. But having our own university, setting up our own university, having it home, it's different, because they value the training, they value new technologies. They want to be up there, up in the air with the chopper. But it's changed a lot. All these, Bush Uni and land management and some other research program, it's come from philanthropy organization that we set up. Not from, we get a bit of money from government, like what we do, Social Ventures Australia, all that. Hey, that's good. But most of the time, we're using our own money through our philanthropic areas, KKT. It's just very, very strong ways of, putting our submissions or putting our ideas, and what our staff would go out and, talk to our donors, whoever, and we get, got an amount of coming back for the projects or for the uni or land management or, education, all that. All our education and university staff and half of those for our staff employment, we go through our philanthropy organization and ask for money. This is the way that we want to see other indigenous areas where people can do that. And we support it, and our organizations such as KKT are looking forward to work on other communities as well. But at the moment, just within our area. But in the near future, we'll reach out to other communities as well.
And Dean, just on that, I think the importance of capability and capacity, and we know for a fact the government does not invest in capability and capacity of our people. And I think a great example of that is the work that Wadakin and other groups have done, and Mimal, just in regards to that capability, capacity building around that space is really important, and being led by Indigenous board members and who are constantly going through local training. But a lot of this funds is actually from the Carbon Project. So, and they're funding their own projects because they're sick and tired of waiting for the local government to do the roads. They're tired of the government, not actually building and developing infrastructure on their communities. So this has actually brought a lot of benefits to our communities across Northern Australia, utilising the Carbon Project, the sales of ACCUs, and to be able to reinvest into building capability and capacity of our people. And there is a mandate from the government, our basic human rights, and they're still not met. We talk about, I think the previous presenter was talking about the high percentage of people going in prison. Our people outweigh that and have continually outweighed that, and we talk about these things that are happening on this conservation and environmental level and scale, but first and foremost, what's important for us is Indigenous rights, and also the importance of supporting Indigenous people and First Nations people of this country. We talk about succession planning, we talk about the importance of protection, and I think we need people to get behind us, to support us and walk alongside of us, not before us and in front of us. This is something that both Dean and Barry continually lead in these conversations, the importance of walking alongside us, and don't speak about us if we're not in the room. And if no Indigenous people aren't in the room, don't enter the room. Stand up for what that's right. And this is just happening too many times, Barry, and Dean. When we're talking about economics and the development, we talk about these things on how important it is for us, but still to this day, we don't get a lot of support. So we have to create our own spaces. And Joe spoke about the white paper. I think it's about time we start developing a black paper. What do you think?
Absolutely.
I think that's all. Thank you very much.
Barry, just last words, what are you hoping, I guess, for the next, 5 years within NALSMA, and what's your call out to the audience?
First and foremost, I want to deal with something you just said there in regards to, and point out, and I'll use the carbon industry as a classic example. There are more pastoralists and non-Indigenous people doing carbon projects, savannah fire projects, than there are countrymen registered projects. So that's really sobering.
Yep.
The other aspect, and why? Because they can make a dollar from it.
Yep.
And the other key aspect within that is if you look at the supply and the whole chain that goes through. So countrymen are primary producers. They're the people on the ground, reducing the carbon in that case. When you go through the chain, who's buying the aggregators? There's 4 aggregators, Indigenous aggregators that I know of in the carbon industry. One of those aggregators actually buy and trade and has got an Australian Financial Services licence to buy and trade. So as you go through that chain, blackfellow involvement lessens and lessens. And that's a key indicator of where we sit. We're heavy on the primary producers aspect. And they're lessons for us to learn as we move into new emerging markets and new emerging opportunities. It's no different to bush foods. Bush foods is the same, in regards to, even though that industry has been established for a while, it's still the same. Mobs are producing, but yet through the chain, buying and selling all that sort of stuff. There's less and less people. So I guess from Nelson's point of view, it's being able to build that rounded aspect of what economy is. And as Joe talks about and challenging those views, and he brought up the NAIF facility and, There's a new committee in there now. So how do we recognise across Northern Australia that Indigenous people and Indigenous landscapes is something that can be invested in? And that's a key question. And it doesn't necessarily mean it have to be bad investment, as in mining or under destructive industries such as that. Let's explore a whole range of different things, and that's where NALSMA is sitting on that edge of being able to explore those opportunities. And within those opportunities, I think we know that the conservation economy is real. We've got the rangers, we've got money going in there, we've got investments through the likes of the conservation entities, Bush Heritage and AWC and TNC right across not just Northern Australia, but other parts of Australia. There's real economies within that. So how do we expand that? But within that space, we're competing. We are competing for the same dollars, for the same philanthropic money, for the same government money quite often. And that comes back to your point, Sissy, I think, unashamedly in regards to NALSMA. We're Indigenous-led, with the board and Indigenous CEO and Indigenous leadership team. And within that space, we want to be able to turn narratives so that it's about, and I quote you in this in regards to where, you've often said that government and other NGOs come in and they deal with our deficits. And that's a reality. When you walk into an Indigenous community, you're dealing with the deficits that are there instead of coming in with what's the strength-based approach look like? I've got rangers here, we've got skilled people, we've got experienced people. How do we build on those strengths? Now you come in and you look at and go, there's something wrong here, we've got to address this. And that planning reflects that. So it's how we turn those models around and upside down, but it's also how we empower mobs through rights and interests so that they've got the ability to stand up there and say, well, this is what I want, and this is what my plan wants, and this is what my country are talking to me about, and let's go in this direction.
Thank you, Barry. Dean, just finishing comments?
Not really. I just want to say thank you very much, but bearing in mind, our people are waiting for the good stories, waiting for whatever is coming. But through our practices, our practice won't stop. We want to continue, train, and teach our children today in a culture able to live and practice. It's the only way, because at the moment, our children today are not doing that. But we're getting behind it, not doing it in the community, but we're taking them out in a landscape where they belong. That's why we need to sit and talk to them and teach them, and we embrace them about their land, about what is there, and what is, what to look after, what to manage, and how to talk to the spiritual ancestors. But it's a long way off yet until we find adequate funding so we can start moving toward setting up this program for other family groups to move back on the landscape rather than in a community. So this is what we're trying to build, putting people back on a clan estate to live and manage their culture, their environment, their heritage. The guidance is waiting for us to move back in the landscape where we lived after we moved to the new kind of a settlement and community. But for today, thank you very much for hearing us, me and Barry and Sissy. I think this will continue. We're embracing what's coming and what needs to be done in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry and Dean. As the audience can hear, the important work that our people are doing in the space is vital. And it's not always easy being the minority in these rooms, and I think it's really important to take note and just understand the complexities that we're working within. There's layers and layers and layers of things that we have to get through. There's policies, there's legislations, there's politics, there's all of this stuff. So it's not easy being an Aboriginal person in this space when we're talking about this, and especially when it comes to speaking about innovative economies and how we can embrace, what's out there for us and to be able to navigate through this space. But thank you. If you can join me in thanking these guys.